Thanks so much. Always happy to be participating in all of the CCGI initiatives. Today is no exception. We'll kick it off by just running through the bios of the various panelists that we have. We're going to start off with Sacha speaking first, and then we will move on to Ronaele, and then we will move on to Janette. So we'll start there. So Sacha, I will do my best to condense the bios as much as I can. But Sacha Vaccianna Riley was appointed the executive director of the PSOJ, Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, for those who don't know, in September of 2023. She has over 15 years of experience in various sectors, including international trade, the private legal bar, and finance, including 10 years as a senior executive management level. She has a strong background in delivering sustainable and effective results in regulatory compliance, risk management, strategic management, and the implementation of compliance and corporate governance systems. She holds a Master's of Business Administration from the Mona School of Business and Management, a Certificate of Legal Education from Norman Manley Law School, and a Master's of Philosophy in Public Law and Human Rights from University of the French West Indies in Martinique. She is has a love of foreign languages and cultures, and is fluent in French and Spanish, and she has served on many corporate boards and professional and voluntary associations, including Air Jamaica Legacy Limited and the Jamaica Bar Association, Jamaica Corporate Credit Union League, Legal Officers Council, and the Jamaica Cooperative Credit Union Risk Managers Association, amongst others. She has a wide set of experience and skills that she brings across to PSOJ and by extension today to our panel. So welcome, Sacha. Happy to have you and looking forward to your thoughts on this topic. We will then move on to Ronaele Bayrd Thornton. So Dathorne Bayrd, sorry, is a partner of the PwC Eastern Caribbean, which is based in Barbados. She's tax and legal services leader for the Caribbean region and the environmental, social, and governance lead for the Eastern Caribbean firm as well. She's an attorney at law and a fellow of the Governance Institute of Canada. She also holds an LLM Masters in Corporate and Commercial Law with an emphasis in corporate governance. Ronaele has extensive experience in examination and implementation of international corporate governance practices, having led teams in the provision of engagements for board assessments, board training for regional companies and conglomerates. She has included ESG board and executive training and in-depth reviews for boards of directors in Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, and the Cayman Islands. Amongst all of her other skills, she has acted for local, regional, and international clients from inception through the startup period into the life of entities. She has a wealth of experience in structuring, incorporation, external registration, redomiciliation and dissolution of companies, as well as restructuring and amalgamations across a wide breadth of territories. Her experience includes numerous multinational clients on matters concerning the creation, restructuring, and operation of Barbados entities. Hi, Ronaele. Lovely to have you. I know we've had a long time association, so you're no stranger, but I'm looking forward to the panel as well. So our final panelist is Janette. Janette Millin is a veteran communication strategist and public affairs professional with over 30 years experience in public relations, government affairs, and the media. She holds a degree in broadcast journalism and has built a distinguished career in the intersection of media policy and community development. A former senior editorial writer for the VI Daily News and a former publisher of VI Chronicles, Janette also served 4 terms as a senator in the Virgin Islands legislature, where she championed initiatives related to transparency, education, and economic growth. Her leadership in public service informs her continued advocacy for responsible governance, particularly in emerging areas such as ethical use of artificial intelligence. She currently leads Millin Young Consulting, a public relations and government affairs firm, and notable events by Janette, which specializes in high-impact professional and community events. Proud member of the Public Relations Society of America for more than 20 years, Janette also serves on the board of directors of St. John Chamber of Commerce. She has held leadership roles in numerous business, political, and philanthropic organizations, always guided by commitment to ethical leadership and civic responsibility. Thank you, Janette and ladies, for attending. Looking forward to all of your perspectives on our topic today. So after all of that, without further ado, I will hand it over to Sacha to commence our discussions.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. It's very good for me to be here. I'm very pleased and privileged. Thank you, Kamla. This has been a wonderful start to Governance Week. And this conversation, for me, I appreciated the invitation because this conversation and topic is very close to home for me. As Karen would have indicated, I'm an attorney, so I started out working in corporate and commercial law in financial institutions, and later having led regulatory compliance and risk management. I believe that this topic is squarely in terms of my areas of interest. But today at PSOG, I actually lead a not-for-profit business advocacy organization that ironically still has to think like a business to survive. So this question of balancing profit and purpose is a well-known challenge to me. So I want to kick off by being just a little bit provocative in the thinking. A lot of people, look at generative AI and look at it as problematic in terms of the AI itself and what it can do. But I believe that one of the biggest ethical failures in AI isn't just the bias or, in terms of findings or the privacy, but rather what we as board members, we as corporate stewards do, and the abdication of corporate responsibility to govern with purpose. So we're so focused on teaching AI to think like us that we sometimes fail to stop to ask ourselves if we as business leaders ourselves, if we're actually thinking as humans anymore. So there's this idea that AI is neutral, but I don't believe that it is. Algorithms don't just reflect data, it actually reflects what our own priorities are and our own values are. And too often, of course, these values driving AI, it's just for profit. So before I came on, I did a quick ChatGPT search to give me a hypothetical strategy for increasing profits for a mid-sized Caribbean insurance firm. We know we have a lot of stakeholders, sponsors, participants who would be from that financial sector. So in just seconds, when I did that type into ChatGPT, it recommended as a strategy for me to use predictive analytics to cut out high-risk customers. It suggested that I could automate claims to reduce errors and, of course, staff. It suggested that I focus marketing on wealthy clients, not the vulnerable ones, right? So none of this, of course, is illegal. But the question then becomes, is it right? Is that the kind of leadership we want to model, right? So the problem isn't what the AI suggested, it's that we never ask ourselves to think about who could be hurt or left out when we put in these algorithms within AI. So for me, that leads to some serious questions that we need to ask ourselves. Are we okay with AI putting profits before people, right? Who makes sure that the systems that are generated by AI, that they reflect our values and not just our bottom line? Are we making existing inequalities worse by ignoring those that are not represented in the data that is generated? So we're all persons in some level of compliance and risk. And I believe that it is time that we move beyond just managing the problems, managing the risk, but we need to lead with a conscience. So in my earlier roles, I would have built systems to protect companies, compliance checklists, contracts, risk logs, the whole works. And of course, that has taught me structure and discipline. But now in this non-profit world, balancing purpose with financial survival, I've also learned something else, that good governance isn't just about protecting the value, but it's about living your purpose through these efforts, these high impact efforts that we try to sustain. So we can't just leave AI ethics to forms and policies. It has to be a part of the real conversations that we're having in the boardroom, with our leadership team, with our executives, and of course in our day-to-day operations. And that's where we as risk professionals come in. We are already asking, as a risk professional, what could go wrong? But now we need to ask what could go wrong and who would it hurt? Who are the stakeholders that are affected by these decisions? So are we asking ourselves, is this technology aligned with what we stand for, our missions, values, the core values and all of those things? Are we using AI to help or to exploit? Who are we leaving out of our data? Are our governance systems ready to handle ethical impacts and not just the legal risks? Are our AI tools just for efficiency, or do they serve our mission? Are they aligned? And then are our leaders even talking about who wins and who loses when AI is adopted? So in the Caribbean, we have to also look at the question of relevance. We often import these technologies, which we know are built for totally different realities, which just don't align with ours. So we somehow hope that they will work here, and they rarely do. Sometimes it makes things worse. So we need to build and govern AI with our own people and challenges in mind. So imagine if we use generative AI to help farmers predict crop yields and access new markets instead of just pushing more products at consumers. Or if AI helped our informal workers find training, social services, or business support, helping them to grow and not just the businesses. What if AI in our company wasn't just about making money, but making a difference? What if instead of just a risk or audit committee, our boards actually put in an AI ethics and impact committee? Because the real risk isn't that AI is getting too smart. It is that we leave the human element behind, and that we actually stop caring, and this caring is no longer reflected in our policies. So as we rethink AI for our context, we need to ask ourselves, are our tools being built for everyone or just a few? Can AI support real development, not just mimicking global trends? Can it empower our communities and not just the elite? And these are questions that I ask myself as the head of an advocacy agency. So forums like this are an invitation to boards and business leaders to step up, not just to recognize that AI is ubiquitous and something that is here to stay, but being involved in terms of the governance of AI, not just from the legalese perspective, but really informing how we develop these systems. So the biggest gap in AI governance isn't just technical, it's moral, in my opinion. We're not short on data or the technology, we're short on the bold leadership it takes to be the conscience behind the driving of AI. Boards are quick to talk about security and operations, and we know that those are essential. That is your bread and butter, that is your day-to-day, that is the bottom line. But we're not asking enough questions about who we're really serving and ensuring that this is aligning. Who might we be hurting and why, right? So here in Jamaica, some of you who may know the PSOJ, others not, we are playing our part in terms of that AI and the use of AI. We're pushing digital transformation across public and private sectors because we believe that indeed AI, if used correctly, can transform how we work, innovate, and grow. And we all want to do that. But with that power, of course, comes great responsibility. So we've released a practical guide to help our members roll out AI responsibly with fairness, transparency, privacy, and all accountability in mind. And we've also submitted recommendations for national AI policy to the government to put strong but enabling guardrails around AI so it can benefit businesses while protecting the public. But we know that policies aren't enough. We can't just regulate AI. We have to lead with intention, right? And we know that we have to make sure that our businesses don't just survive in the AI era where we are now, but we actually stand for something. We stand for, the lady at Massey spoke about ethical, resilient, and being deeply human. And that is what we need to do to stand behind the use and rollout of AI in our businesses. So I welcome thoughts from the other panelists, but those are the submissions I have this afternoon, Karen.
Very thought-provoking, Sacha. Absolutely. I think you're right. The humanness in AI is real when we're talking about moving it forward. We need to do that with intention and not be reactive and responsive to the horse that is bolting before us. We need to really, as businesses, individual and collective, identify what are your goals, as you say, what do we want to achieve out of AI? Because at the end of the day, especially generative AI, it's what we put in is what comes out, right? So it's really about making sure that what goes in allows the output to be what we intend it to be and not respond to what comes out. So absolutely poignant there. I fully support that. Ronaele, you wanna build upon that?
I'll try. Thank you, Sacha. That was a really good way to kick us off. So, from my perspective, a lot of what Sacha said resonates with me, and thanks again. Let me start by saying thanks to Kamla and the team at CCGI for having me back to share a few thoughts and to keep learning with all the rest of you. These discussions are so vital for us in this space. So, the discussion regarding AI, from my perspective, I think it's so important that we see this as part of the discussion that we've had for years at CCGI and in all governance spaces, that this all goes back to the responsibility of our boards to act in a way that understands, appreciates, and values all of an organization's stakeholders. So it forms part and parcel of the overall discussion of how do we use good governance to drive the right behaviors regarding key fundamental issues that allow our corporations to have a positive impact, to do good while doing well. I would think, with all of these discussions that we've had, two of the biggest things that jump out at us as being critical and high stakes and urgent would be environmental issues. And another would definitely be AI and how our boards are responding to their responsibility to act in a manner that is fully appreciative of the positive impact that they can have versus irresponsible behavior resulting in an impact that is unduly negative. I'd like to pose a question to all of us, really, and just share a bit of data as a backdrop to that. Where we think we are with our boards, understanding what that responsibility is, and where they are on their journey, individually and collectively, where we are in the region, vis-a-vis technology and their understanding of embracing of responsibility regarding technology. Kamla, if it's okay, I'll just share 2 slides just for 30 seconds.
Sure, you have permission to slide share, so you should be able to pull it up.
So just to take a quick flashback to some information that we consistently try to gather as a PwC ESG team within the region, looking at where our boards are every couple of years on key issues. A couple of years ago in 2022, we asked our directors across the region, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, Eastern Caribbean, and Bahamas, which of these areas do you think you're not paying sufficient attention to? In 2022, directors, 40% of our respondents confirmed that they felt that digital technology, was an area that was getting insufficient attention. Last year, in 2024, the responses suggested that directors feel there's less of a gap. So only 10% of directors indicated last year that they felt that there was some deficiency in the level of attention being paid to this area. Now, I'm going to stop sharing now, Kamla. Given the rapid, I don't think there's much that is developing at the pace of artificial intelligence in our world currently. Given the pace of AI, do we genuinely believe that directors have picked up the pace with their understanding of their attention to digital and technology and AI specifically to such a degree between 2022 and 2024? Or is there a lack of acknowledgement as to how much attention needs to be paid to this space? If there's any area that currently requires directors to take a page out, literally a page out of our Professor Garrett's book, that they need to be learning boards and constantly try to keep pace, it's AI. And directors are not going to be able to learn at the pace of AI. So we have to be smarter because we can't be as fast as. So it's a question of going back to a lot of key points, I think, that were shared with us during the opening ceremony. That keynote address was really good in terms of framing the context of this discussion. What are the areas that our boards really need to focus on to make sure that our impact is one that is not losing our humanity in a space that is rapidly evolving, not hour by hour, day by day, minute by minute? How do we stay smart to manage that situation because we can't keep pace with it? So it goes back to a lot of key points, I think, that were raised in that opening session, and that we often have discussions with our boards about. It's, how do you make sure that this is forming a part of your strategy, that you understand how best to manage this within the wider context of the positive impact you want your organization to have? How do we, as a board, individually as directors and collectively as a board, stay current enough to manage the situation and to ensure that the impact is one that allows us to maintain our humanity? So our keynote address speaker shared some very, I think, good tools that I think some key points that we need to consider, whether a board makes this a strategic part of their plan and takes on responsibility for, whether these very important matters are delegated to committees. How do boards really ensure that they're using their governance role to ensure that this is being properly managed and having the right positive impact and seeking the right balance as they maximize the opportunity? Because the opportunities are real, and this is not going anywhere. This is going to very much be a part of our reality indefinitely. For there's no turning back now. We've opened Pandora's box. I'm trying to be optimistic as to humanity's ability to harness benefits without completely destroying ourselves. And I think we are capable of doing that, but only if we act smart and we act as quickly as possible, because we cannot act as quickly as AI.
Indeed, absolutely, we can't act as quickly as AI. So we really do need to be smart in that approach. Part of what you said made me think a little bit about yesterday's panel one discussion. One of my little scribbles was I think it was the panel one yesterday, the divergent views between boards' views on AI and the employee, views on AI, and where do they converge? So at the end of the day, the boards are focused on security and all the risks, right? All of the things. You want to take their time, make sure we're crossing all our T's and dotting our I's, making sure that we are ready. And maybe there is a lack of self-awareness in terms of the skills that we need. But from an employee point of view, the horse has left the stable in every instance, every single employee, down to just drafting, an email, myself included sometimes. How do I say this? How do I say that? Very basic things. But the point is, we are ready to adopt from a management and employee point of view. We're ready to embrace it. Maybe not having thought about it fully, but
that's the role of the board.
And that is the role of the board.
That
exactly.
is the role of the board. Take a step.
So it's that conundrum.
Yes, correct.
Absolutely.
And for those employees, and there will be many who are not as excited as others because the reality of the impact on their roles moving forward is very real. And so you will find, and it's often generational, but you will find many employees being very excited. Then you'll find some in between, like myself, who understand the benefits, but I'm wary of, are we doing enough to keep up? The point has been made several times that we have frameworks often in place, regulatory, governmental. What's happening to govern our private sector? There's very little guidance available to boards. as to how they navigate this space. And it's one thing to say, directors, you have to be agile. You need to be learning how to navigate this and how to fit this into the framework that you have developed, that seeks to drive profit while doing the right thing. But it's one thing to say that, but there isn't a lot of guidance out there, right? So it's up to organizations like the CCGI to provide as much dialogue and as much guidance as possible while we try to catch up, and really encourage directors to be smart in the face of a pace that is just so rapid.
Yeah, absolutely. Janette? Anything? Are you ready to share your thoughts? Bring it home.
Yeah. So that's not fair, right?
Not at all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Kamla, for this invitation. It is really a pleasure for me to join this important conversation. And knowing that my perspective is a little bit different, right? Because it comes from a unique intersection, working in public relations, advising private sector clients, and serving in government. And from where I stand, the topic of AI ethics and corporate responsibility is not abstract. It is deeply practical, especially here in the Caribbean. And it's funny because it seems like at every panel and presentation, I hear someone who refers back to having, testing the ChatGPT. So what I did was, because thank you again for inviting me, on behalf of the United States Virgin Islands, right? As United States Virgin Islanders, we don't participate enough with our friends in the Caribbean. Maybe when I was in Rotary, we did that very well, but as part of government, et cetera, we really don't. And so I went into the Chat GPT to say, well, what are the linkages between in the United States Virgin Islands as a Caribbean people and as the United States? And it's really interesting because, of course, culturally, we do share a lot culturally, but of course, we are reigned by the governance of the U.S. So once again, Kamla, thank you for your foresight in inviting in the Virgin Islands of the United States. And I hope that this is not the last time. But I digress. I digress. As small island communities, we can't afford to get this wrong. The systems that we implement, whether they're in public services, tourism, healthcare, finance, must reflect the values and protect our people, as been mentioned before, and also promote inclusive growth. AI can help us to work smarter and faster, but if we're not intentional, it can also widen inequality, it can automate biases, and it can erode trust. So that's why balancing profit and purpose is not just about corporate responsibility or corporate social responsibility, but it is also about safeguarding our regional identity and economic future. We must design and deploy technology with a clear commitment to ethics, to equity, and transparency. And so we know that AI is not new. We've been dealing with this. I don't want to tell my age, but about 30 years ago, I was in school, and I remember when we had to start writing our reports and everything by computer, and I would just make a mistake and erase the whole sentence and start over again. And my classmate next to me would say, "Well, why would you do that?" And today is a complete reverse of that. Today, we start to enter our thoughts, and the computer actually gives us the next thought, maybe the next thing that we were supposed to say or can't say. It happens on our phones. It happens on our computers. It happens everywhere. So at times, we could actually let ourselves go and be a little lazy and let ChatGPT and let the computer direct what we're going to say. And then that would be the dangerous thing, because we would lose a sense of authenticity. In fact, yesterday I was meeting with my graphics artist person, and I I gave him a bunch of things for marketing of a function, an event that I'm doing next month. And he asked me, did you use AI? Like, sometimes now you want to wonder, right? Because ethically, I want to be as ethical as possible, right? So sure, I'm going to use AI, and I sure enough did not use AI before last fall, but I participated in a workshop that says if you don't use AI, you're leaving money on the table because it's really about balancing time, but you also don't want to lose authenticity. So when I say to you, and I'm using anecdotes, right? If I say to you, I've been in the business for 30 years and I produce a product that someone says, was this AI? Sometimes you have to wonder if you're that good that they would confuse it with AI, or does it look fake, or what exactly is it? And so that, as a communications industry expert, it's troubling for me, right? Because obviously I came up with my own concept. And one thing that must be balanced is the creative versus the execution. So okay, so maybe someone uses AI to come up with these ideas, and so that's not a bad thing. But then who executes it? Because AI is only going to give you that creativity to like take it from here to where, but you have to then take that baton and then you have to make it work. So therein, once again, comes in this issue versus the machine and the human being who has to carry out and execute these ideas. Once again, we talk about chat GPT prompts, and I continue to use chat GPT because I'm kind of like new to the whole technology area because I use my own brain, and it's been a hard sell for me to just just go AI completely. But it's one thing to then enter something into ChatGPT and say, this is what I like, versus using your own life experience and your own knowledge to enter and not just prompt, and then maybe have it enhance what it is you like to portray, especially for smaller groups that don't count with a lot of experts on hand, and you need someone to maybe look something over. Then you pass it on to ChatGPT or something, and you input your information. But at the end of the day, is it authentic? Is it real? Did you edit anything? Did you put anything from you? Like, for example, I know people who do Facebook posts, for their businesses, and they just say, okay, Facebook, tell me, what can I say about ethics? And then ChatGPT, whatever formulates whatever is to say. But we need to balance that by actually putting in your life experience, your work experience, so that then it becomes something that is authentic. So I clearly, the ethical considerations are, we teach everything, but why is it wrong to teach ethics? I've taught ethics at the university level for the community engagement programs that they have there. And I've also introduced legislation in the Virgin Islands legislature regarding ethics. So we have ethics in how we do our business in the office, in HR, in public relations, in communications. And so it is very, very important that as leaders, we work together and not in silos to come up with the guardrails that will protect us as a people, and not just as a community in the Caribbean, which is what we're talking about right now. I understand in the Caribbean, we must make sure that that language and that culture and those different details that reflect us as Caribbean people are reflected also in how AI is developed and carried out. So I could talk about a whole bunch of things, but one thing I don't do is carry time well. So I will stop here, and then we can have a discussion amongst ourselves as to, from my perspective, which is communications and government and corporate responsibility as well. So thank you for the time.
I don't know about not being good to time. You are perfect on time.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you again. Yes, very, very stimulating. I loved your use of the predictive text, because it really is this is the extension of that in many ways. So I I sort of appreciated that use of that analogy. And again, coming back to your authenticity and humanness, as you say, and making your stamp and individuality that we need to be able to keep as we move into this space that keeps evolving around us, for sure. You see it with the kids in school, and also for us, as you say, you want to make things your own at the end of the day. You don't want everything to just be cookie cutter and generic. And I really resonated with me on if somebody's asking, did you use AI? Well, to me, it did something wrong, not something right. Because what are you trying to say? So that's really, yeah, it's really a fair point. And it does come back to the end of the day, teaching. If we get back to the basics and this generative AI, it's how do you put the data in to help make these decisions? And Kamla earlier in the session just before this one, I think there was Ricardo was talking about the distinction between generative AI and the agentic AI. Okay, so generative AI, it's prompts and us saying and leading it to where we want it to lead. But when we transition that over, we're taking the control and humanity and the decision making out of our hands. So now really is the time to make sure we understand how AI works, build the basics from which we're going to be building the decision-making ability of the future, potentially within the guardrails, as you say, to allow the evolution, which is coming anyway. And we do need to be intentional. Again, coming back to intention, goals, and purposeful, how we go about doing that. So, Janette, I think that was absolutely perfect to bring it to where we can all come together and sort of chat about our individual views. Sacha, Ronaele, any thoughts on Janette's piece before we move on to additional thoughts?
So I too share your view in terms of how relatable the example you used. I think everybody is being encouraged to, avail themselves of the technology. And so we find ourselves, there's a lot of cross-cutting in, you're doing your business, but you're doing a little bit of graphics here, you're doing a little bit of there. And of course, you have to incorporate the ethical use of other person's artistic work, that sort of thing. So it is something that I think we all find ourselves. I too, like Janette, have found myself in a scenario where I have been asked, did you use AI to do this? When really and truly, I find that what I'm able to produce is, as they've talked about the use of prompts and how agile you are in terms of giving it relevant and pertinent information to get the best quality information, that sort of thing. And I think it does become a little line blurring sometimes in terms of what you can do for self-help as a professional and interfacing with other professionals in terms of what you produce as output. So very interesting take, Janette.
Thank you so much.
Definitely. And Janette, so here we are at the stage of life that most of us are at, various stages of adulthood. And we look then at younger generations who will know nothing else and who are going through even their education at this point with the understanding, because of the dialogue and a lack of countering dialogue, forceful countering dialogue from our leaders, that this is okay, and that it is merely a convenience and a way of life, that we really need to be careful with balancing that with the conversation as to the ethical implications of taking this too far. If we're having a challenge in our organizations having those conversations, can you imagine generations who are coming through an educational system where our educational system does not know how to manage this, how to ensure that there isn't rampant abuse? So if we are not vocal enough in the private sector and in the public sector, so that our younger generations understand, as your leaders this is the expectation, and we're holding ourselves accountable. And as such, this is what we expect of you as future leaders. Then, because we can't just think about the now. This is not just a now problem. This is, or challenge rather, not problem, but challenge. This is very much a future challenge. I have exactly plagiarism is rampant. And that takes me back to my first question when I shared my few comments. I'd love feedback as to, based on the feedback that we received in 2022 versus last year, do we feel that directors genuinely are wrapping their heads more around technology and all that's coming at us on a minute-by-minute basis, such that their response is that we're actually better off than we were 2 years ago? Or am I being cynical when I question if that is an accurate reflection of where we are in the Caribbean?
Ronaele, I think that we are still having a challenge in terms of directors' understanding of the extent and the importance of the question of AI. It reminds me of that transition when data privacy and data privacy legislation came in, and this question of whether this is in fact something that it is for the board and leaders themselves to take on and take an active role in, versus say your chief IT person. Or so a lot of boards still look at AI as a technical question that is an IT question, similar to as to how they would treat with a cybersecurity or something like that. It does not form a part of what they see as strategic leadership imperatives. I believe that you still do have a handful, and you will find that there are some countries out there, some companies out there at the forefront who
Absolutely.
are taking this AI discussion very, very seriously. But I don't believe that the majority, certainly not even in the smaller companies that we see out there, whether or not even in terms of the training programs, the governance training, the training for directors, AI doesn't factor in many of these boardrooms from that ongoing continuous learning perspective, in my experience. So you will have those that, dependent on whether they are multilaterals or whether they're doing business globally, internationally, they might have that awareness. But I think generally we are not as advanced as we should be in terms of really contemplating AI as a board imperative at this point. I do not believe that we've reached that level of sophistication. What I do realize, though, and you mentioned the whole use of AI in schools and the question of plagiarism, as I think it's Saran mentioned here. But what a lot of employers have also encountered is that you engage, and people will tell you, particularly from an HR perspective, where a lot of persons, you are sending a resume or sending, an application, a cover letter, that is AI generated. And persons you hire this person, so this person is onboarded, and you realize that in terms of your talent management, a lot of persons are finding that, okay, but I was duped. We have these people who have come on and have presented themselves as a particular way. And when it comes to being able to do the work, being able to generate and deliver, they are not doing that. So even, it's not just a problem in schools. We're having a problem even in terms of who we're employing and having in our companies. And so because this is such a problem, I believe that the issue and the importance of it is indeed escalating to the boardroom. So they're seeing the relevance and importance of it, but I don't think we are there yet in terms of really having that governance approach and to AI at this time.
And I like to add that I agree with both speakers, because I believe that this whole AI business and the thought of it is growing so fast, is growing faster than it's being controlled. And so it is very important and very timely that this organization would take this as a subject matter, because then it leads to lack of trust when it's misused, and a damage in the brand of companies and organizations if it gets out of hand. And of course, in the schools, what are we producing? What brain power are we producing? So I believe that all leadership and all levels of corporate governance should be looking at this. And obviously, Kamla, your organization is a leader in this because, again, you don't want your reputation to be damaged because it takes so long to build your reputation, but it only takes one instant for it to just be totally destroyed.
Absolutely. Ronaele, I think I share that we are the AI space is expanding and directors generally don't have a handle. But I will say this, I do think there's a lot of expanding scope that's happening in the last 2 years in particular. So that from 2022 to 2024, I do think there's been a lot of attention at the board level on IT related thinking. I'm using that quite generally, right? So on data and cyber and all of that, so I think from a self-assessment perspective, they may be very well, yes, we've come 100 times further along than we were in 2022, especially in regulated industries where, the regulators are now pushing cyber and the importance of doing certain things and having certain controls in place. And as we see incidents occurring. So from that point of view, there's been progress, but now the scope has gone beyond that into this AI space, which frankly, I really don't think in 2002 was contemplated in the same way that we're thinking about it now. I know that maybe early adopters or people who understood AI better than some of us at the time said, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And you sat in those conversations and meetings and it was all hypothetical. It's coming. And just like almost overnight, certainly from my point of view, that coming turned into an avalanche. Or shoot, they were right. It's here, and it's a waterfall.
Yes.
So I don't think that we're delusional. I don't think boards are delusional. I think that what they're measuring themselves against is probably not in that AI space particularly, but I say IT, but data and cyber security, security generally is where the focus is, which is why as they look at AI, they're looking at it from that angle. What are the risks connected to us, as opposed to being eager and excited about the potential opportunities. And Janette, just to say, I mean, as an extension of that, in today's papers in Trinidad, one of the topics this morning, and I thought quite poignant, is MIT study shows ChatGPT abuse impairs brains. And there's a whole study at MIT right now just basically saying just using AI as prompts, it's in the Trinidad Guardian today, just using it to help us generate sentences and constructing things is basically leading to brain rot because we're not allowing ourselves to think.
Intellectual laziness,
Correct.
Right? I agree.
Correct. And I mean, less so for us, in the sense I say us, I don't like to use that bucket, but where we have had traditional, teaching which required intellectual thought and assimilation of information, as opposed to the younger generation now that can go and type it in and get a response out of it. And the schools, I suppose, if we talk about plagiarism in education, are faced with it on a daily basis. I know in my daughter's school, computers to do exams are out. You got to write essays in pencil and paper now. And when you are submitting papers electronically, I was trying to remember the name of the website. The schools now use a third-party site that everything that comes through has to get uploaded into in order to assess whether they're AI generated.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I thought it was very interesting, but that's the reality of that system. And I suppose because educational systems are testing knowledge, it's in their face today. Whilst as organizations, there's nobody testing us. We are testing ourselves.
Yes.
So
we're doing self-policing, right?
Self-regulation, self-policing. And so we have to have the awareness to do that testing ourselves, as opposed to these structured educational frameworks that require it to be done for them to show their value,
Yes.
But very, very valid valid perspectives. Anything? Kamla, we have 2 more minutes before we move on to your Q&A phase. So I don't know if we have any other thoughts in this space before we open it up to the
she's taking a call.
yes.
But yes, ladies,
opening up to the wide audience.
Yeah, I'm keen to hear thoughts from others. I do think that, you know, the conversation has reinforced concerns, but also some of my optimism in terms of us understanding, at least having an appreciation of what it is we need to do in this space and the conversations we need to be having with our boards.
Okay.
And so what we need to do is keep having those conversations, but the pace needs to pick up because none of this is waiting on us to take our time and have lengthy conversations. And it ultimately goes back to that wider discussion as to how we can have a positive impact as organizations, as those holding the economic power. What is the path that we take in key areas to ensure that that impact is a positive one? Our Caribbean societies are small, are close-knit, are vulnerable. We can't afford to leave anyone behind. And so the conversations that we need to get very real about very quickly include very much how we are going to displace stakeholders that may be more vulnerable because of their skill sets, because of their ability or inability to retool. How do we ensure that we are not leaving them behind in the name of efficiency and in the name of driving economic value? That fundamentally, from my perspective, is a conversation, a tough conversation we need to have with ourselves very quickly, because we do need to remain competitive. But staying behind the curveball and pretending that, you know, this isn't happening and the rest of the world isn't moving ahead and becoming that much more efficient. You know, some would argue that we have catching up to do in the industrial age in the Caribbean, far less in the age of AI that's taking off. If we are to remain competitive and not, or to become competitive, we have a lot of catching up to do as it is, but we need to make sure that we understand as well that we have vulnerable, that we'll make a conscious decision as a Caribbean community that we're not prepared to leave them behind.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
So if I may jump into the conversation, then I think, you know, there's some really, really great questions that have been posed here by this panel for us to think about in terms of our responsibility. But I think, Sacha, there was something you said that really, really drove it home for me. And you were saying that generative AI is seen as problematic because you have all these concerns about privacy and securities and loss of jobs and so. But you said it is the board members where we are truly seeing failure. For us as board members to govern with purpose. And then you made the point that the biggest gap is not technical, but it's moral. So if we come to what Ronaele has just shared, and Ronaele, the truth is I'm an eternal optimist. But when you still look at the fact that we have been discussing for decades the whole notion of impact on environment, and we've seen the place at which the planet has reached. We have seen the extreme fight from so many different corners to move away from this wealth maximization concept, but which continues to hold so strongly to organization. You still look at profitability as your main evaluation as to success. Then we have to really begin to find solutions very quickly. And do we, in turn, and now this is a genuine question, do we now turn to the AI and ask for those solutions? As Janette is saying, you prompt it with a thought and it gives you your next thought.
And then you have to make it authentic, right? You have to weigh in. You can't just let the machine tell you and direct your life.
Right. So given that we have failed the last 5 decades.
And that's the biggest conundrum, right? Right, Kamla? Because what is ethics? What is morality? What is humanness? We have to decide what we want, because that's that's where you build it into the system. The system doesn't do it on its own, right? And without the data in it, it's going to move on to something else, right? Or as the algorithms suggest in all of our social media, the more you look at something, the more you give it, you give it airspace, and to the extent that there's no other thought. I mean, I had to change where I get my news from, because I'm not getting the information in certain environments. So it's a human problem that we challenge ourselves with every single day to make those decisions and really lead businesses, but as humans, lead in a human way where we're empathetic and caring, and it's not just about me. It's about, bigger than me, more macro in thinking versus micro. And if we can't figure that out now, how are we building it into a system that does it on its own? Impossible. Absolutely
and I like
impossible.
the point. Yeah, I like the point too that Ronaele took that further to say, so if we are not finding the solutions now, how can we expect the next generation and the generation after that has not even experienced what we have experienced, who will be completely immersed in that world, to be able to solve the problem.
That's their world. I mean, it's these kids grew up with iPads in their hands, right? So this is just a natural progression. We have to learn things when something new comes up. It's just intuitive for younger generations. But are we going to continue to set a bad example? We continue to set bad examples to future leaders as to how we are going to respond to the need to strike a balance between, and the right balance, and giving the right priority to environmental issues, to societal issues, to diversity issues. Are we going to add this to the list, or are we going to submit? There's so much that's not within our control. Is it possible for us to somewhat insulate ourselves as organizations and within the Caribbean somewhat to make determinations as to how? I'm not saying it is possible, but I'm saying, do we need to consider that? Because we see the world around us that is not in a position to provide leadership and guidance in terms of a lot of key issues that will fundamentally impact the Caribbean, given our vulnerabilities far more than many other societies. So with that in mind, do we take the decision to be more progressive and to determine our own fate to the extent that we can in certain key areas? It's something we need to consider, because if we only wait to be influenced, given what is doing the influencing, I don't think we'll stand a chance.
So it then comes down to each of us as individuals. As Karen said, how do you unravel that conundrum? How do you make that decision moving forward? So as I told the panel for the opening day, I am prepared to sit with others on their rocking chair 10, 15 years from now to look back and say, I've done my part.
Yes.
So we have to ensure that we intentionally look at the environment and the impact of what we're doing. And really, as it says with change management, it really begins one person at a time. Each member on the board need to be convinced of that outcome that you want, so that the board could then make those kinds of decisions. Because balancing profit and purpose continues to be a struggle. Like, I was really appalled when I heard that big companies like Unilever, which were leading the sustainability race, had now turned back because they were like, they're no longer profitable. It's not making what they had intended. And so when you have big organizations like that's cutting back on their corporate social responsibility and going more into their corporate profitability, then it means that the message is still being lost.
The survival point, right? At the end of the day, they were leaders in where they thought it was going, and have had to pull back on that because it's an existential threat. Because if you're not profitable, okay, to a certain extent, then you have to sort of scale back a little bit and come in line to be there for the long term. But there is correctly a balance between that, for sure. But we do need to lead. We need to lead the thinking that profit versus, you know, purpose, and the fact that you want a long sustainable life as an organization. In order to do that, you need to write good business. You need to build brand, you know, loyalty, awareness, trust, reputation, and those things don't happen, you know, overnight, but can be destroyed overnight, as you say, Janette. But that's when you take the long view, which is very hard when you have to report on quarterly earnings and profitability.
It's true.
And the fact that people compare, even from a financial point perspective, this quarter from this quarter, if you restate something, well, why did you restate that? What happened there? It calls, you know, it's got every decision into question when the world is watching.
It's
so
very, very difficult. Very, very. It is very difficult. And us making these statements here, by no stretch of the imagination, I think do any of us take it lightly. That it is an extremely difficult road to walk. But you know, it still has to be done. And the current environment is sort of giving an out to those who weren't genuinely committed to the path, I think. The current environment is one that is so uncertain and so fraught with interesting perspectives, I'll put it that way, that it makes it that much easier to waver in commitment, unfortunately. But those same organizations, those same individual directors and collective boards still need to not forget the underlying message that their long-term sustainability, building these determinations into their strategy, that they are seeking the long-term, they're looking at the long-term sustainability of their organizations. It again goes back to this is not for today, this is for the long haul. And the same young people who are growing up with this being a way of life are the same young people who will still hold these organizations accountable when environmental issues are not reined in, if we see no progress in turning things around. And these are that's a generation that is your future talent pool that you're trying to draw resources from as an organization. Those are your future customers, and they don't forget. So all of these things are factors that our directors, our boards need to continue to have front of mind.
Karen, may I suggest that transparency is probably one of the best tools? And I'm asking you that in particular because as someone who is in compliance as well, where it is ensuring that there's adherence to certain things. To my mind, when things are done in the open, which is why we ask for companies to post their financial reports, to do their annual reports, to ensure that there is information out there that allows us to be able to make informed decisions. So transparency in all that we do. Building those guardrails for ourselves, because we too have to ensure that we are kept on track, because it's very easy. As Sacha said, you know, she's in charge of a nonprofit organization now, but you can't function as though money doesn't matter, right? Similarly, for us at CCGI, we pay our own bills. We are not dependent on funding from any one organization, and therefore there needs to be prudent financial management. But that coupled with a level of transparency that serves as the guardrail to keep us in check, that we are doing what is in alignment with our purpose. Can that help?
I think transparency is always a good thing and does help. But at the same time, you know, you're dealing with a public that you need to ensure is mature enough to understand the information that you're presenting to it. And they are also thinking long term. You know, if you're thinking quarter to quarter and looking at those financials and reacting to those financials, which does happen in you know, more mature markets, then it could be in a short term a negative thing if things don't go right in this particular quarter. And if you're responsive to not looking at the longer view, then there could be a negative impact to that. But at the same time, if you do have educated investors who are looking at you and following your path, over time and remembering what your strategy was and what it is now, and when you're self-correcting, then yes, I think transparency is a wonderful thing to keep your board accountable, as well to what they have promised their stakeholders.
Yeah. There's a great question in the chat, Karen, from Shelley Ben from the BVI.
I saw it, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, are there any ethical non-negotiables that boards should be using as a starting point for developing their code of ethics in the era of AI? Well, I certainly think it comes back to who you are and what you expect from the people who work for you. So, I mean, that is rule number one. What is our company willing to accept from the people that represent us? So it has to start with the people and what we expect from them, because those are the people that think, that help build the back end of AI, right? I mean, ultimately, they're the ones asking the questions, they're the ones designing the structures and the strategies and the thinking, in my view. I mean, I don't know what you ladies think. What else do you think is a core ethics?
That would probably stimulate some other thinking too, because I'm considering if it's ethical non-negotiables. So therefore, there are certain things that companies have sort of put in place. For instance, your ethical supply chain. Let's ensure that whoever our suppliers are in adherence to certain things. So no modern slavery, ensure that you are paying fair wages, ensure workers are being treated right, and pay a fair amount for the goods that you are sourcing from other areas. So I think that is an area that boards should be considering. Who are you partnering with?
Yeah, but then it comes back to who's making the decisions of who you're partnering with.
Right. So the board, that's your ethical non-negotiable, that you want to ensure that those in your supply chain or who you are partnering with are similarly following a certain code of conduct in how they do business as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the value chain will always be important in so many issues, in so many areas. So whether it is environmental issues, whether it is human issues, that downstream and upstream value chain is extremely important, but so is the starting point. What are you doing within your own organization that sets the parameters of what you will and will not expect and accept from those with whom you partner? So starting at that core, what is your value system within your own organization? And that, as Professor King has said to us many times over our years, and his sharing thoughts with CCGI, this is not just the mind, but the heart of the organization. So when a director step into that room, understanding what is the value system by which we are going to operate, that starting point is vital. And I think when we see organizations within the Caribbean who have led in this space even those long before, we've started to have a lot of these conversations, and before we had codes, and before we had, those who have led in this space have been those who first and foremost determined what their value system was. Right. And they allowed that to lead and guide their decisions. Whatever you wanted to call it at the time. Now, we have clearly defined thoughts around what these things need to be called, but it starts with that. And that ultimately comes back to the topic, I think, of what we're discussing now. How is AI fit into that? Because it goes back to what that value system is. How are you going to utilize this new technology, new way of life? It's more than technology. It's a way of life now.
So Dr. Farrell has a suggestion in the chat. Dr. Farrell, if you're able to unmute and share your thoughts with us, I think that would be great as well. Just checking to see if you're able to unmute. If not, we'll read out. Right, good, yes, let's hear you.
Yeah, no, just asking whether, in light of it, was it non-negotiable? I'm thinking that the first non-negotiable really is disclosure. And I'm not too sure that the private sector can address this problem entirely by itself. AI has to be dealt with by government and the private sector. There has to be law and there has to be regulation. And I think in the same way that governments mandate health warnings on certain kinds of products, whether it's your toothpaste or your soap or whatever. And in the private sector, you have to list whatever ingredients you put into the products and so on that you're selling to consumers. I think in the same way now with AI, there has to be disclosure that if your staff members are using AI for something, and the courts are now facing that issue, as Karen will probably know, in respect of practice directions, in respect of AI, where lawyers are trying to use it. And the practice directions are saying, listen, if you are going to use this, you must tell us that you are using it so that at least the court is aware and how you're using it so that then somebody can check. Because there may be situations where the user it doesn't check. There's a human in the loop, so to speak, but the user doesn't check properly. So you get false information being propagated and so on. So I'm saying that the first basic thing is disclosure. I have used AI to generate this report. I have used ChatGPT and so on. And in that way, people can have a heads up and they can then deal with the situation, the matter, in a more concrete kind of fashion.
I think that's
I like that contribution in particular, that it is full disclosure, because it's something that Ricardo mentioned earlier today in his presentation when we spoke about what are the boards concerned with, as he is developing a lot of these AI tools as well. And he said, so his board wanted full disclosure on for them to understand. But then in his relationships with persons, he was ensuring that they too understood. He spoke about full disclosure with his staff as well, so that allayed their own fears about whether they're going to be replaced, knowing that they're communicating even with an AI agent as opposed to a human, because they may not have known differently.
Yeah.
So I agree entirely with this notion that one of the things we want to adopt should be full disclosure.
And it comes back to your point of transparency, Kamla. So yes, back to basics. When you're citing materials in a paper, we can make sure that we cite use of AI or computerized, resources in order to generate outcomes.
Yes, we have a comment from Charlene Sharp in the chat. I want to read it out though, because this is interesting. She said, is it that we have to identify a priority? Seems everything in the Caribbean is a priority. We, however, must choose one. So is it that we have to sacrifice economic growth to maintain the guardrails, as small markets have limited leverage with global AI companies? So do we have to sacrifice economic growth to maintain the guardrails? Well, to begin with, I am not even sure that we can put in the right guardrails. Because when you think of the contribution from Ricardo this morning, and he said that you have to trust the bigger players who are building out the AI, that they are putting the systems in place, that these are not going to easily turn rogue agents and misuse your information and sell out your data and do things that would put you at risk. So therefore, it's going to be challenging for us to know what are the guardrails that we are going to put, unless we are going to say, no, we are not using AI, which does not make sense in today's world. So we have to find a solution in terms of how we adopt it, how we use it, how we stay abreast of developments, but how do we govern that process? So,
Well, I like to add too that sometimes we look at AI as such a bad thing because it wasn't an original thought, but we forget that even accountants use calculators. So as human beings, we've come up with ways to make things easier for ourselves. So we can't get away from a little assistance, because as a writer, I have an editor, right? So can ChatGPT also edit? Because I came up with something so fast that I put it in for this mechanical brain to check it out. And so maybe after that, then I give it to a human being to look at again, as to edit it even more. But let's not forget that it's not completely bad to have the ChatGPT or whatever AI resources that you're using to assist you in your work. And again, as I said in my original presentation, let's not let's not look at it like such a bad thing to have a little enhancement. But you don't want to rely just on that quote unquote enhancement. And as I said before, these machines are like a brain, but we still have that corporate and personal responsibility that we cannot leave behind. So that's really important. In your transparency, you have to be very responsible with what you're doing. And that alone will ensure trust from others.
And that's why, Janette, in my initial presentation, I mentioned the work that we had done through our Innovation and Digital Transformation Committee. We were very deliberate in building out a framework for the ethical use of AI, which we wanted to spread, amongst our business members as a template, as it were. So I know we can't legislate certain things. We can't legislate certain morals and all of those. And to Karen's point as well, too, I think we need to, as a society, and as a society in the macro space and then the micro space as companies now define what our values are, and what is ethics, what is ethical for us, what are our values. And basically, once we have these guardrails in terms of how to use AI ethically, what suits and aligns with our mission or vision or values or core values, that is then when we can use AI responsibly. And it may look a little bit different across companies because they have certain, values that may not necessarily be aligned. But the point is, it really has to be on the basis of defining what our values are, what our ethics are, and then putting those guardrails in place for the ethical use of AI.
That speaks
Karen,
again.
sorry, Ronaele, Karen, I just want to give a time check. We have 3 minutes more on this panel discussion, so maybe you'll just want to take closing comments from the panelists and start with Ronaele. She was about to share something as well.
Okay, well, I guess I'll use this to close then. But just looking at a couple of comments in the chat, and Novek's last comment, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, which speaks to the last few comments that we've made. That and going back to other comments made about the fact that we need legislation, we need structure. We're not the best in the region at moving swiftly when it comes to key legislation. The world isn't even sure how to legislate this. So what is the core value system that we can try to create some sort of framework around that gives enough flexibility to not stifle creativity, but allows us individually and collectively to not lose our humanity, I think is probably the approach we need to take. Because if we wait on external forces that aren't even clear as to what they should do, and we try to put additional pressure on ourselves in the region to create a structure that is a moving target, in a situation that is rapidly evolving, that as well is only going to result in one amendment after the next. I think Sacha's initiative is probably the way we need to go. Again, remembering that we really, if nowhere else in the world understands the importance of us banding together and supporting each other and not leaving anyone behind, it's us in the Caribbean who our history shows us of how strong we can be together and how much we need to look out for each other. and that we have a long way to go really being competitive on the global stage. So we need to give ourselves every advantage while continuing to protect each other as much as possible.
I love that.
No.
Sacha, do you want to give your closing comments next?
My closing comments will rely on something that you opened with, that whole, these 3 words, ethical, resilient, well, 4 words, deeply human. And I think we've spoken about, the drawbacks from AI, the fact that, certain guardrails, legislation, all sorts of things need to be put in place to really harness and govern in this new era of AI. But I think those need to be the underpinning thoughts for all of us, not only as within our businesses, but we spoke about even in terms of schools, for those of us who are parents, how we raise our children in terms of how they operate as students, etc. But in the larger communities as well, because this has to be a societal definition of what is ethical, what serves our communities. We talk about the board and the directors. The directors are driven by what is considered to be, the values of shareholders as well, in terms of when they report to them. But what is it that we are shareholders, and we're all shareholders in some, guise. What are we demanding? Are we ourselves demanding the morality and the ethics in the use of AI when we, develop these systems within these companies? So those are just my final thoughts, that I believe that AI is certainly here to stay. As you said, it's not new, it's changing, it's ever evolving. But we need to ask ourselves the tough questions about how we use it ethically, who we are serving, who we are hurting if we don't, ask ourselves certain questions and harness AI for all the value that it can bring.
Janette?
Yes, thank you once again for the invitation. I think I've learned more than I've imparted, but I'm very grateful to have been here sharing this time with you. And I just like to leave with these words. In fact, we've come a long way from the days of the cavemen and the dinosaurs, and time has been moving and it doesn't wait on any of us. We also know that as human beings, there's a misuse for everything under the sun. Accountants fudge numbers, politicians do wrong. In every area of our lives, someone is pushing the envelope to do wrong. And so I would just like to end with, once again, asking everyone to realize that we have a corporate and personal responsibility to do the right thing. And so the more authentic we are with what we produce with these enhancers, the more trust that we build as corporations, as government officials, because people will then trust us more. Yes, AI may be a fake brain. Well, it's actually not a fake brain because it really uses so much information from all over that it is kind of a brain. But then we have a voice, and we should always be attentive to the use or misuse of this not so new tool that we have at our hands. But certainly, let's be grateful that we have some enhancers to help us in life, and in every stage of our lives. We're going to appreciate when life gets easier, but we must be very attentive to not overuse or misuse these tools in our lives. Thank you.
Karen, any closing words from you?
Me, just to the point that we have to get back to humanness and being involved in the underlying design of the data that informs the solutions that are going forward. And as we've been talking about towards the end, it's for now using it, leveraging, and until we get to a balance, and we always have a self-correcting, there's always, things ebb and flow, and we always self-correct. Hopefully we don't get too far along the path, but that we do, as you say, transparency and disclosure, but also remember we are designing a future state so that we are thinking from a particular perspective. And I think it is a useful perspective in setting guardrails, But at the end of the day, we do need to ensure that when we are designing, we are taking the disruptors and the innovators and the progressive thinkers of the generations to come into the conversation. They have to be at the table because we will be designing a defunct system without them. So it's very important that we have that viewpoint and we create that counterbalance to make sure that we get to an end state that is designed for purpose when we're long gone.